being registered as a battlefield isn't the same as being listed as a building. Okay, so there aren't grades of it; they're all the same, and they don't have the same protections. And it's also, and this is critical, not a scheduled monument. Okay, so the things that can be done on a battlefield, which is a field, can't be done on a field which surrounds, for example, Avebury or Stonehenge. It's environmentally beautiful, and it
Mm.
is historically and archaeologically complete vandalism.
Hello and welcome back to Watching Brief for the week of the 6th of October 2025. I'm joined as ever by my co-host, Mr. Andy Brockman. How's it going, Andy?
It's going all right, actually. I'm chasing various stories about which our viewer may be familiar. Watch this space in weeks to come. But yeah, it's a delightfully dark grey, dreich autumnal day here in southeast London.
Okay, I believe the word is dreich.
Dreich. I'm sorry.
Yes, dreich. But yeah, okay, fair enough. And regardless of the weather, regardless of the status of upcoming news stories to keep an eye on, our Watching Brief continues. And this week we're going to be bringing you a chat between Andy and Graham Evans of the Northamptonshire Battlefield Society to talk about Edgcote, the Battle of Edgcote and the battlefield site that borders, I think, the route of the HS2 line, and has therefore had some interesting interactions with that civil engineering project, and it possibly has revealed, I don't know, would it be too much to say a loophole or loopholes in protection?
I don't think it is too much to say that, actually. I mean, that's certainly what, as you'll hear in the conversation with Graham, that's what the Northamptonshire Battlefield Society and the Battlefields Trust are concerned about, certainly, yeah.
Hello and welcome again to the Watching Brief, and we're joined this afternoon by Graham Evans, who is the chair of an old friend of the Watching Brief, the Northampton Battlefield Society. Those of you that have been following the Watching Brief in the pipeline really since we started will be aware of the stories we've covered from Northampton and Northamptonshire. For example, the threat to the battlefield of Northampton itself, which is really what gave rise to the society, as I think Graham may well explain. But also in the persuading very gently, shall we say, the then Northampton Borough Council to actually repair the Grade 1 listed Eleanor Cross,
Yes.
overlooking the battlefield of Northampton
Yes.
itself. Absolutely, yeah, and also the sort of and it leads into our topic this afternoon, the perhaps less successful instances of battlefield preservation at Bosworth, where part of the registered battlefield area was lost to a test track for autonomous vehicles. And our topic this afternoon, the battlefield site of Edgcote, which is perhaps one of the lesser known, but as I think Graham, I'll ask Graham to explain really from the start. As the leading expert, perhaps, on the Battle of Edgcote and the author of a book about it, what was Edgcote? Why is it important?
Well, I like to think of it as the most important battle you've never heard of. So it is in the Wars of the Roses, but it is not a Yorkist versus Lancastrian battle. So it is the battle that occurs after Warwick has a major falling out with Edward. At this point, they're both Yorkists. Warwick wants to replace Edward, we think, with his brother Clarence. So he marries Clarence to his eldest daughter Isabel, and he causes a rebellion to happen in Yorkshire. And then the armies, Edward's army, with his supporters, the Earl of Pembroke and Earl of Devon, they're marching up towards Northampton. Warwick's marching up from the London area, and his supporters are marching down from Yorkshire, and most of them collide in Northamptonshire. Edward IV doesn't get there, and neither does Warwick. So their major supporters get there, and there's a battle fought just in the south of Northamptonshire, just north of Banbury, in an area called Edgcote. And at that
Now,
site, the Edward's supporters are defeated, and Edward is subsequently captured and imprisoned, and various things start to unravel. So that's why it's important. It's the first step before Warwick becomes a Lancastrian. He's not Lancastrian at this point, but he will become a Lancastrian shortly afterwards.
so it's the sort of season 2 cliffhanger in the Wars of the Roses Game of Thrones.
Yeah, well, if you want, yeah. But yes, I mean, Edward gets
Oh.
it thrown back, and then he loses it again, and then he gets it back. So it's part of that to and fro. But it is,
Yeah.
and it has other wider repercussions. It's very important for the Welsh. Large numbers of Welsh nobility and Welsh supporters are killed at the battle, and the Earl of Devon is subsequently murdered as he's fleeing the area. And Warwick starts to do some house cleaning from his point of view, and he executes a number of people, including members of Elizabeth Woodville's family, Edward's queen. So it has wide-ranging ramifications beyond what you might think, and it features one of those mysterious characters, Robin of Redesdale, who dies at least twice during the campaign and comes back as somebody else. So yes, buy my book if you want to know more. So go.
It is a fascinating story, and it's no little thanks to Graham that we know as much about it as we do nowadays. When I was doing the prep for this interview, I did as you do, a Google search. Other search engines are available, and back in 2012, I think it was, the Telegraph ran a story about another setback to HS2 as battlefield discovered en route. Was the battlefield lost?
No. Okay, so that you see, 2012, that predates the founding of the Northamptonshire Battlefield Society. So that's is a long time ago. And that's, in a way, it's the only battlefield on the route, Edgcote. The line of HS2 was shifted ever so slightly so that it doesn't go through the middle of the registered battlefield area. It just clips the edge of it. Goes through an area called Trafford Bridge, which once was thought of as the main site of the battle, but by then that wasn't the case. So it is the only registered battlefield on HS2's route. So this is not an HS2 story, okay? This is a registered battlefield story, because it is unlikely, apart from something else, that Edgcote will be, oh God, I'm going to regret saying this, it should not be affected by issues again like this, but there are reasons why other battlefields might be. And you mentioned Bosworth, and it's a slightly different story to Bosworth as well, and it gets tremendously technical as to why we've ended up with what has happened.
For our viewers who maybe aren't as familiar as maybe you and I are with the issue of registered battlefields and so on, because we're both of us archaeologists and historians of conflict and so on. Can you explain the sort of registered battlefields 101? What is a registered battlefield? How is it decided, and what does the registration actually mean?
Okay, so there are 47 registered battlefields in England. Scotland, it's different. Which is not a massive number, 0.01% of the rural landscape or something. And they are all battlefields which they have to fit a number of criteria. The main two are they have to be reasonably secured in the landscape, so we know where they are. They have to be sort of like complete, so they're worth preserving. So there are some which are sort of like bits of Newbury, completely lost because of housing, so there's no point in them being registered. And the third thing is they have to be historically significant. And that register is kept by Historic England. And this year is the 30th anniversary. 2025 is the 30th anniversary. And Historic England's website says, if anything's going to be done on a registered battlefield, it has to be wholly exceptional. But one of the problems is that being registered as a battlefield isn't the same as being listed as a building. Okay, so there aren't grades of it, they're all the same, and they don't have the same protections. And it's also, and this is critical, not a scheduled monument. Okay, so the things that can be done on a battlefield, which is a field, can't be done on a field which surrounds, for example, Avebury or Stonehenge or something which is, an Iron Age fortification, because those are scheduled monuments. These are not scheduled. It's almost like it's an honour system. So it has to be taken into account by planners, but they can overrule it if there are exceptional local circumstances. And this has been recognised as a problem for over a decade, going back to when Gordon Brown was Prime Minister. So this issue goes back years and years and years and years, and it's been known to be an issue. And
in a number of locations, I can remember.
Oh, yes.
I think one of the first stories of this kind I looked at was another local campaign, less successful than yours at Northampton, about the Battle of Fulford Gate outside York. Our viewer who may or may not have been lucky enough to be watching King and Conqueror, it was part of the 1066 story. We won't get started on that one this afternoon. No, that was an important part of the 1066 campaign in the case of the Earls of Northumbria confronting Harold Hardrada and King Harold's brother Tostig at the gates of York before entering York. And it was sort of what drew Harold north. But there was a campaign to try and preserve what was left as what was regarded as Fulford, the Fulford battlefield site. But in the end, it wasn't covered because of subsequent development, if I remember correctly.
I mean, it is an issue. I mean, the story of battlefield preservation is, in a way, is a Northamptonshire story, because the modern battlefield preservation movement, which includes the founding of the Battlefields Trust, started because of the building of the A14 across the back of Naseby, and that led to Glenn Ford doing his metal detecting surveys and all the other work that was done to establish where Naseby was and all that. And if he's if there is one, he is the founding father of conflict archaeology in England, and he was the county archaeologist in Northamptonshire, and that's why we have they went to Huddersfield, and we have a specialist centre there that's for conflict and battlefield archaeology.
And we'll come back to metal detecting in a minute, because that's obviously a factor in what's been going on at Edgcote as well. The methodology of studying these, yes, but the methodology of studying historic battlefields is a lot is built in many cases is built around highly controlled archaeological metal detecting, isn't it? So
well, that's right. And one of the issues with what's happened here, which is again in ways why it's not an HS2 stuff, is we as a battlefield society have been aware of where the line was going to go for years. Okay. And we consulted and spoke to the archaeological teams and the engagement teams with HS2, and we went down and we walked over the battlefield and we saw where the line was. And as much as you can be comfortable with what was going on, we were comfortable with it. We knew where the line was going. We weren't expecting any battlefield remains to be found because it wasn't going through any of the fighting. The construction of the line meant that most of it would be hidden behind the natural folds in the ground or in a viaduct. So in terms of the visual aspect of looking at the battlefield, wasn't a problem. And the archaeological standards that were applied to it covered not just normal holes in the ground and geophysics, but there were conflict archaeologists involved. Sam Wilson, who's done all the work at Barnet, he was involved. And they did it to a very high standard. They didn't find any battlefield remains when they did the archaeological work, which again we're expecting, but they found the Roman villa and they found lots of other stuff. So it wasn't like they were playing at it. They're doing it properly. And we've done battlefield walks going back pre-COVID around the site. And we can see the diggers in the distance when we go and do the walks. But it's never been an issue because we knew where they were digging, we knew what they were doing, and we knew what the standard of the archaeology was. And what unravelled for us was I was doing a walk on the anniversary of the battlefield this year, 24th of July. And I walked around, Edgcote, if you ever do it, is a lovely walk. It's in undisturbed countryside. It's arable farm now. It was arable farmed in 1469. Apart from the planting of some trees, the landscape has hardly changed. I mean, there's a farmhouse, but you walk around this copse of trees, and all of a sudden you go around the corner, it's like drawing back the curtains, and you see the battlefield, you see the layout where the armies were going to be, and it all makes sense. And we walk around this, and I was about to do the big reveal to the walking group, and I turned around, And I looked across the battlefield over from Edgcote to Colworth, and there was this big pile of earth with diggers on it. And they were leveling it off, and it looked like they were building the base for a factory or a helicopter landing pad or something. It was just like, what's going on? We haven't heard anything. And when there's previously been attempts to build in that area, we've been notified by the Battlefield Trust of the planning applications. So, I went round, looked at it, couldn't work out whether it was HS2 or the farmer or whatever, probably HS2. Came back, got in touch with Simon Marsh, who's the threats officer at the Battlefields Trust. And he said, I'll go and do some digging. And he went away and he found out, digging, sorry, poor choice of words. He found out that what was happening didn't have a planning application. And it turns out it didn't have a planning application because it didn't need it. And that's one of the big issues that we have here. Because this is why it's different to Bosworth as well. Yeah. The issues at Bosworth. This is why it's different to Bosworth. Yeah. So we couldn't object to it because nobody told us it was going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, this whole story has the air of sort of a whole series of unintended accidents and unintended consequences that we can maybe dig a little bit into how that came about and how it can be looked at in terms of other risks to other battlefields in future. Are you able to estimate which bit of the battlefield has been affected by this? Was it an area where there was fighting? Was it an area where the armies were drawing up?
Okay, so I mean, the registered battlefield is a big area because it encompasses a number, all the theories that were in vogue when the registration went in, which includes one which places Danesmore to the north of the ridge line, okay, up by the Cherwell, and that the researchers that we did basically debunked that, and we identified the waterway where the fighting is, a Petite Rivière over which they fight, okay, and there's a crossing across that, and we identified that as a stream which runs at the foot of Edgcote Lodge Hill against Colworth Estate, and you can see that stream on estate maps from the 18th century. You can see it on John Speed's map from 1603. So the likelihood is, bearing in mind what we know about when work was done there, that stream was there in 1469. And that runs at the foot of where they are doing this work. So if you can imagine a ridge line where the fighting would have taken place, and you can divide it up into thirds, this is from the perception of the rebels, this is the rebels' right-hand flank, and there's a ridge line behind which they were hidden and over which they came, and there was fighting all the way along there. So it is likely that there will be battlefield remains there. It's not the scene of the most fighting, that's a little bit further off towards the middle, but it is almost certainly there should be some evidence of fighting there. And not just that, one of the things that drives what happens at the battle is whether the armies can see one another. And the ridge line next to the stream on the Colworth side, it looks like you can see behind it from where the Royalist army was, but you can't. So when the fighting starts, Pembroke thinks he's fighting a small force at the bottom of his hill, and he's not. There's a whole load of rebels hidden the other side of it because he doesn't know they're there because he's lost the scouting battle and he's blind. And then he gets attacked across the streamline and so on, and then the battle unfolds. And so read my book for further details.
You very helpfully, and as you've done with your public comments, you shared the planning portal application as was for this, and basically it relies on, well, first of all, it says that no environmental impact assessment, which includes archaeology, was required for this particular activity. And as I understand it, what the people responsible for this at HS2 were doing perfectly legally,
yes,
was employing what's called, and again, those of us that have had any involvement with planning issues and planning and applications to demolish historic buildings that haven't yet been listed and that kind of thing, it's called permitted development right,
That's right.
which, as I understand, which as I understand, is basically it's part of the planning system whereby landowners, developers have certain rights to undertake certain activities which don't require close scrutiny on the part of the planning. Once they've got planning permission, then certain things roll on from that.
Okay, so as I said, there is no planning permission. So they are developers, and they have permitted development rights on associated land. It's governed for those who are taking notes. It is Section 2,
Yes.
Part 4 of the Town and County Planning General Permitted Development Order, England 2015. Okay, so if you want to go and look it up, that's what it is. And what it says is you can do works associated with construction on a temporary basis, as long as you put the land back as it was. Okay, do that, you're fine. You can do what was done. What is the big issue for people doing that, however, is they want to avoid what you've mentioned, which is an environmental impact assessment. So in order to avoid that, they submit what's known as a screening application, which is not a planning application. So even though it's on the planning portal, it's not a planning application. Do keep up. And what it says is, we're going to do this work. And interestingly, they didn't say it was permitted development when they submitted the screening application. And you can submit screening applications for planning applications as well. And because environmental impact management can be so expensive, if someone goes, you need to do an environmental impact assessment, developers will go, oh, okay, we'll go somewhere else. So HS2's contractor had done a lot of work. So they done a massive amount of work, because what we're talking about is storing excess soil from digging out the cutting and for other work. So they're going to store that temporarily, and then when they finish, the soil will go back probably to build a viaduct and so on. So it's temporary storage. It's an area, I think 30 football pitches is how we describe it. So they put piling soil on that area. And they did a massive amount of work. So what we're going to do is we're going to construct it like this. It's going to have this slope. It's going to be put like that. And we're going to make sure we don't contaminate topsoil by stripping off 30 centimeters of topsoil. We'll come back to that. It's going to be constructed in certain ways such that when there's water, there'll be no contamination into the water stream. And so that we don't get lots of alien plants planted on it, it's going to be grassed and screened. And we're going to do all of this. And then we've got it, and then we'll take it off and we'll put it all back. Okay, and that powered through the screening thing. They consulted, the planning officer consulted the bare minimum people required, which is perfectly normal. I'd like to point out the planning officers have done nothing wrong.
Absolutely.
Everything that's done has been completely legal. So Historic England said, effectively, when a planning application is submitted, there should be a heritage impact assessment. Okay, the archaeologist overseeing it, they said they'd done archaeological work, they'd done geophys. The archaeologist said, okay, that's all right. Actually, that's not all right. But because it's a screening application for permitted development, which wasn't actually flagged in the screening application, Historic England missed there was never going to be a planning application. So the requirement to enforce a heritage impact assessment and the threshold for doing that, requiring that, is much higher than for environmental impact assessment. Legislation is different. So that never came about. And the geophysics, and we touched upon this, was pointless. So they geophysed the area and said there's nothing there. Well, yeah, you're looking for ditches, and you're looking for buried things on a battlefield. You're not going to find them unless you stumble across a mass grave. Very, very unlikely, because they're very rare in England. The way to find stuff, as you mentioned, is to do archaeologically supervised metal detecting in the topsoil, and that will find arrowheads, buckles. Won't find musket balls because it's a medieval battle in this case. And they stripped all the soil off. They stripped all the soil off.
Exactly. And I think I think to illustrate the point, if I may, Graham, that people watching this might be familiar with about 10, 15 years ago now, the the battlefield of Bosworth was actually relocated, in fact,
Yes.
by Glenford's team,
Yes.
on the basis of controlled archaeological metal detecting and finding finds in the topsoil, the most famous of which being the Ricardian boar
Yes.
heraldic
Yes.
figure,
Also-
which completely rewrote the history and the topography of the Battle of Bosworth. So this stuff is really important
it
when it
is.
comes to battlefields.
Now, just to clarify, and the reason they stripped the topsoil was for environmental purposes, because they were piling subsoil on the area, and they were absolutely fastidious about ensuring that they did not contaminate the topsoil. So they took the topsoil away so they can put the subsoil on, and then they'll take the subsoil away and they'll put the topsoil back. And then we can metal detect it when all the stuff has been jumbled up and put in. So it's environmentally beautiful, and it is historic and archaeologically complete vandalism. And there is an argument for saying, I mean, that the regulations require them to put it back. I can't exactly what the words are, but to restore it as it was. And you could argue from an archaeological point, they can't do that because they can't put the soil back meter by meter where it was. So are they in breach of that? Well, probably not. I mean, nobody's got the law, nobody's got the legal budget to fight them on it.
And in fact, it would require Historic England actually to bring the case, wouldn't it? And that is highly unlikely.
Yeah, I mean,
It's the most likely way to, short of a judicial review or whatever, it would be Historic England who would have to act.
well, the local authority is certainly not going to have the money to do it.
No.
I mean, and we haven't either.
No.
So, I mean, one part of the trail of the paperwork afterwards was this had, I'd say, it completely gone past everybody. And I don't think, nobody said this, I don't think the planning officers and the local archaeologists thought they'd started work, because they thought, you know, if there's going to be a planning application, we'll see more paperwork, and they didn't see anything else. And when we started to poke around it, the planning officers go, oh, yeah, okay, so there should have been a certificate of lawful development requested, and there wasn't. And then you dig a bit more and he goes, oh, okay, yeah, it's a Schedule 2 Part 4 permitted development. They're relying on their permitted development rights. So there was nothing, honestly, nothing could be done apart from,
I think it's
you're going to lie in front of the bulldozers, but you know, you're
yeah,
you're not going to get anywhere with that.
no, and I think it's worth pointing out as well that, I mean, and again, people might be familiar with some of the media coverage. HS2 have made a big thing about their environmental responsibility. I mean, obviously, perhaps one of the most infamous cases is the so-called Bat Tunnel, which has been represented and misrepresented in the whole bit. But also, I mean, the one of the current jokes is that one of the most expensive archaeological sites in the world has been the cemetery that was excavated at Euston, head of HS2's London terminal, which the government hasn't actually okayed yet. But it was famous for example, they found the grave of Matthew Flinders, the Australian, the explorer of the Australian coastline in the early 19th century. So HS2 has done a lot of archaeology at both ends of its line and right the way along it, and to a very high standard, as you said.
Yes, and you know, I attended briefings of it, and if you're going to have a railway line, and I don't want to debate that because that's nothing I can control in my life. If you're going to have a railway line and you're going to put it where they're putting it, they're doing it in the least impactful way they can. But ultimately, because it's a high-speed line, has to be straight, it's going to go and plough through something, and it's ploughed through this. And the problem for us, of course, is this is temporary work, and it's done in an area where we never ever thought they were going to be. And one of the things that is a concern for us now, and we've talked to the cabinet member for planning and roads and infrastructure and the planning officer responsible. So we, as a Battlefields Trust and Northamptonshire Battlefield Society, we've had a meeting with them, and I identified issues that we've got, and they're on board with this because heritage is a big deal for us as a county. But there is another field where this could happen, and hopefully we'll get a guarantee from the HS2 contractor that they won't use that field. Because I mean, the other thing that drives this is there are real commercial pressures, not just on HS2 but on the farmers in this area. So HS2 is cutting off the corner of somebody's farm. You can't get at it while they're building HS2. Okay, so it's a real pig for him to seed and plough and whatever. And they're paying him an amount of money to store soil on it. You know, it's a business, isn't it? Running a farm. And they're going to put it back such a way that he can farm it again when they're finished. You know, you're almost like, well, why wouldn't he take the money? I mean, I can sympathise.
Leaving behind the rebels and their ridgeline at the battlefield at Edgcote, what is? I mean, I noticed that you and your colleagues at the Battlefield Trust, and again, for people who aren't familiar, the Battlefields Trust is an educational charity and an expert body and an expert advisory and conservation body in the UK that specialises in battlefield work, battlefield archaeology, battlefield interpretation. You and the Battlefields Trust have got behind this story not because of any impact, as you've explained, that you can have really now on what's happened at Edgcote, but the potential for impacts in future. What's the concern?
Well, the issue is that battlefield protection is very weak. And what we would like to do is use this as a springboard for saying, look, this can't go on. Okay. The legislation needs to be tightened up. So what we are looking to do is start to argue for example, the expansion of the protections under the permitted development rights that we've discussed, which cover things like listed buildings and scheduled monuments, should be extended to registered battlefields. So that's point one. Point two, and you've touched on this, is the double-edged sword of metal detecting. Battlefields are not protected by Section 42 licenses, which cover scheduled monuments. So if you want a metal detect on a scheduled monument, you have to get a license. You won't get one. Same needs to apply to registered battlefields. And the third thing is to make registered battlefields more like listed buildings generally. And that virtually happened. So in 2023, the then government passed the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill. Now the Levelling Up and Regeneration. And for all the bits and pieces and the arguments in that, there was a campaign by people like us and the Battlefields Trust to have a particular clause put in the planning regulations to increase the protections of registered battlefields. And that came to pass in, again, getting technical, section 102, open brackets 1, close brackets, open brackets 1, closed brackets of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act 2023. Okay. Unfortunately, that was enacted in 2024. Unfortunately, it required secondary legislation for it to become effective. And we had an election, and that whole stream of legislation stopped. So there is a draft piece of enabling legislation sitting on the planning minister's desk, which has been shelved while Labour do their review of planning laws and so on. And I understand why that is, and I don't want to get political about it and so on, because it took 15 years to get, the Conservative government to put this stuff in, and it's fallen again. So that becomes the third string of the bow. So that enabling legislation needs to be put into law. We need to extend the metal detecting license regime, and we need to have an amendment to the permitted development laws, more on a footing with listed buildings. And until that happens, it's open season.
And I think it's worth pointing out here, in terms of metal detecting, and as you know, I'm sure you're always saying, we're always saying that, metal detecting can be a gift to archaeology. It can, if it's controlled, if it's recorded, if it's directed, it can be incredibly useful, as we've seen at Bosworth and other battlefields like Naseby and so on.
Yes.
And Towton. But the flip side of that is there have been attempts to hold metal detecting rallies on battlefield sites because it's perfectly legal to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And there were attempts to put not metal detecting on registered battlefield sites into a code of practice, which the National Council for Metal Detecting actually opposed inserting that clause, if I remember rightly, because they saw it as a curb on the hobby, which and a curb on something that was already legal. So it's a fairly fraught area. I mean, have you been able to take any soundings from the likes of, well, obviously the government, local MPs, Historic England on this?
Well, the Battlefields Trust have a stronger relationship with Historic England than we do. So there is correspondence going on backwards and forwards. The local MPs for the county are aware. I've had meetings, discussions with two of them, and email exchanges with the third. So they are aware of an issue. That's where it has to go next. And one of the things that we're with the Battlefields Trust doing is working out what the next steps are. We made the fuss now because of the concern that something would happen elsewhere on Edgcote, and hopefully the noise means that that won't happen. But we can't go hand to mouth on that. And you come back to Bosworth. I mean, Bosworth, that was a planning application where there were viable objections, and for local reasons, they overrode everything that all the experts and everybody said, because there was a local interest to do with jobs and so on. And so there needs to be this firming up needs to be done so that a national asset cannot be wrecked for short-term local interests. And it's almost, it's not necessarily NIMBYism. It's definitely we want this in our backyard because it brings jobs, but not if it wrecks the battlefield. And I think that's where we have to get to.
And I think that's probably a good point to finish our discussion on. I'll just make one final point, Graham, if I may, and that's I hope I think a lot of viewers watching this will hope that you're as successful in this campaign as you were at Northampton. And I'll also point out to any local politicians watching it, the then leader of Northampton Borough Council, David McIntosh, won the coveted title of Philistine of the Year in privatised rotten borough awards because of the way they were treating the borough's heritage. So politicians who aren't getting on board with this very viable and important campaign to protect our battlefield heritage, be warned. But Graham Evans of the Northampton Battlefield Society, thank you very much for joining the watching brief.
You're welcome. Thanks very much.
So how do you sort of come away from that sort of conversation? Is it a matter of lobbying possibly, or just awareness? If someone watching, for example, is connected with looking after a battlefield in their area, is this just a something to be aware of, in so much as if there is something happening on the edge of your battlefield, maybe negotiating where spoil goes and not falling into this moment, if we want to call it a loophole or a trap, that means that actually that topsoil layer becomes vulnerable when that soil is once again scooped off.
I think if I've learned anything in covering these stories in the more than 10 years now that we've been doing the watching brief, it is that people locally who are concerned about local heritage issues, whether it's a battlefield in this case, or a historic monument, a scheduled monument, a house that is listed or should be listed, don't rely on the authorities to do it. You have to do it yourself. You have to make sure that you have. What's the phrase about keeping them honest? Because for all sorts of reasons, things fall, issues fall through the gaps in the provision, gaps in the resources, gaps in the willingness of organisations to address these things.
And I suppose, as you say, it's better to err on the side of presuming cock up rather than conspiracy. So it could just be someone just doesn't think about it, and then it's there, and you have to deal with it. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, perhaps at this point it might be worth giving the point of view of Historic England. We referred to Historic England a number of times in the conversation. After I finished speaking to Graham, I contacted the comms team at Historic England, obviously the regulator, government advisor, who are responsible for making sure that, at its most fundamental, that they operate against heritage crime. Now, stressing again, no crime was committed here.
No,
right? This was all perfect. This was all perfectly legal. But I think it did point up potential issues. So I asked Historic England two specific questions. I said, does Historic England accept that while nobody appears to have acted unlawfully, the intention of registration of the battlefield has been undermined by the way of issue of dumping soil from HS2 at Edgcote was handled, and that in stripping 11.7 hectares of topsoil with no prior archaeological investigation, the ability to understand the archaeology of the battlefield may have been damaged irreparably. And then on the wider issue, I said, in order to prevent this scenario happening again, will Historic England be asking government that the clauses bringing the protection of registered battlefields and other heritage assets, like shipwrecks, for example, into line with that afforded for to listed buildings and to conservation areas, that changes that were set out in section 102(1) of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act 2023, that those clauses are activated by the government via the necessary secondary legislation as soon as possible. Now, HE got back commendably quickly. They're always very good at answering questions and treating, we have grown up conversations. Mm-hmm. This is what they sent. In answer to the first part, a Historic England spokesperson said, we were consulted on this proposal and gave our advice to West Northamptonshire Council. In our advice, we noted the potential impact of the planned works on below ground archaeological deposits and the visual setting of the battlefield. So clearly they're saying basically nothing to do with us, Gov. We passed it on. It was a planning issue for West Northamptonshire. If there was a problem, it was at West Northamptonshire. And Graham sort of alluded to that in terms of the way that the whole thing was handled perfectly properly, but in a way which in the end meant there was no archaeological investigation prior to the topsoil clearing and the dumping of the spoil. They didn't address the second part at all.
Right. Okay, fair enough. Well, yeah, okay. Are we at the point in public archaeology and the journalistic aspect of public archaeology where we should just be grateful when people acknowledge having received an email? Is that the state of play in 2025? I
prefer to take a glass half full view of
that is half full.
No, look, like I said, HE are always commendably open, and like I said, we have grown up conversations. I ask grown up questions, and they behave as a grown up PR team, comms team, and answer them in a way that benefits their organisation, or I think in this case prevents their organisation getting into the weed of a row with government about how legislation needs to be passed and hasn't been. What's being said in the background, well, maybe we'll have to wait for an FOI or something like that to reveal whether there has been any dialogue on this particular matter.
Never let it be said that the archaeological protections don't have teeth. There's one tooth and it does the rounds. And you're likely to get gummed, but every now and then you might get a little nibble, and at that point, you're going to be uncomfortable. Well, that just remains to say, really. Thank you, obviously, to Andy and to Graham as well for their time in this episode.
I will say again, just to wrap up and loop it back to where we started. Mm-hmm. If it's not, and as we said in the conversation, not just in terms of Edgcote, but what the Northamptonshire Battlefield Society have done at Naseby, at Northampton itself. It was co-founded by the late Mike Ingram, who we refer to a lot on the watching brief, and now Graham's picked up the colours and kept them flying, and has done a brilliant job actually in getting this issue into the media. They've had coverage on the BBC and across the press as well. We're just a small part of what they've achieved in getting this issue talked about. But again, it's a group of volunteers. As Graham said, his background's actually not he's a very skilled historian, but actually his background's in the property industry. He's not a heritage professional in that respect. And it's people like him across the country, as we've seen in other cases, Goodwin Sands, Stonehenge, other cases we've looked at, who have you could argue, have done the job that our professional bodies, our representative bodies, should be doing. And long may that continue if our professional bodies are as wary of getting engaged as currently seems to be the case.
I agree. Interesting. Not that I often don't agree with you, but you know what I mean. Yes. So thank you to you both for your time. Of course, if you're watching at home, if there's any aspect of the conversation that you think you'd like to bring to our attention, please do comment below, or indeed you can get in touch with us through various means, both public but also super secure over on the Pipeline website. The Tip as a Story will give you more information. The Tip as a Story section on the website there. And I suppose that's it. That's this week's watching brief, or this fortnight's watching brief. Is there anything interesting coming down the pipeline, pun intended?
The short answer is yes. The longer answer is I can't tell you about all of it yet.
Oh, you're
I
sounding
will.
just like Sifa. Right.
I'm having all these sort of super important secret meetings which I can't tell you about.
Yeah, and some very nice
just trust me, I'm an archaeologist.
Exactly. Yeah, and therefore I'm a good person.
Yeah.
I'm going to shut up. I'm going to before I start ranting again. Right. Bye guys.
Like and remember, share, like, and subscribe to the Watching Brief YouTube channel and to the Archaeosoup channel. And see you next time.
Yep.